Okay, welcome back after a couple minutes break. For those of you watching the recording, hopefully all of this works. We are back on, and the next half of the lecture is going to be talking about content-driven design, plain language, and plugins. So this is a little bit more about how to go about the earlier parts of your design process. Specifically, has anyone heard of the term lorem ipsum? Just general raise of hands if you've heard the term before, or kind of filler text. That's totally okay. That's even better. The idea behind today is death to lorem ipsum. So what exactly is content-driven design? Now that I've said it like 4 or 5 times in the process of this meeting agenda, but content-driven design essentially focuses on using actual content throughout the entire design process to inform and guide your decision-making. So the idea is just that whenever you're figuring out things like text or images or graphs or anything like that, actual content that goes into whatever you're making, use things that are reflective of your user's content. Right? Don't put filler names or don't put filler text like lorem ipsum, essentially like fancy gibberish that designers will use to fill up the space. This kind of actual using content is going to help you make better decisions about your design work because you have a better idea of what your users are going to be looking at. So why is this actually important? The idea of using placeholder materials, if we think about this in terms of something more physical, like let's say we're building a house, using placeholder content is like saying, just build the frame and then we'll figure out what the house is for later. Like, let's build this entire building. I don't care if it's a school or a home or a hotel or like anything else. We'll figure out what goes inside when that time comes. That doesn't make any sense. The idea behind making a space is to figure out how it's going to serve the purposes of that space. And the same idea goes behind any kind of digital design. The purpose of making a website or a mobile app or any kind of digital work is to serve whatever the content is. If we worry about what a website should just look like and we jam lorem ipsum into the site as placeholders, we don't know how it's going to actually flow and feel when we add all of the actual real content that's going in when our users are using that product, right? So design should essentially mold to the content that they have, not the other way around. We shouldn't have content that just fits this very, very beautiful box that we've made. It's like if you got like a $3,000 frame and you put like the default image that comes with picture frames inside of it, that doesn't make any sense, right? The idea of having even photos in picture frames that you buy at the store is because you can get a sense of what this might look like when you put your own photos inside of it. So oftentimes designers will just clip lorem ipsum, which is again that idea of like set out gibberish that is looks kind of like English but is not quite. They'll clip it to fit their designs, and this means that you can avoid things like nice edge cases. So in this example, we have all of these, I think, gardening coaches where all of these cards have perfectly 3 lines of text in them, right? But we do not know if an actual person who's trying to pitch themselves on this website is going to write exactly 3 lines of bio. This person could write one tagline, one sentence, because that's what they think they're supposed to write. This person could put their entire resume copy pasted inside of that card. And these 2 cards are going to look very, very different from what this current design says they're going to have. So basically, by using lorem ipsum or by clipping your work to be what you think looks really nice, you're shooting yourself in the foot later down the line because you don't know how to address things that are going to come up later. So instead of doing this, prioritizing these considerations earlier on in your process means that you can avoid this kind of backtracking later on where you figure out, how do I handle this empty state? How do I handle it if somebody writes too much? How do I handle it if somebody writes too little? So here's another bad example of non-content driven design. This is my now separate tangent I'm going to rant about for 20 seconds. I hate Dribble because almost all of it uses lorem ipsum. Almost all of it is stuff that looks like this that doesn't have any kind of real content in it. By doing that, you're not making something that is very useful. So in this example, we have a whole lot of things that we can look at. And not to say that this visual design is bad. It's very pretty. Like, it looks very, very nice and could definitely work. But the content that's inside it right now is not reflective of what you might actually see. So for example, this kind of thing that looks like Instagram stories only accounts for short, in this case, Anglo-Saxon names like James, Mark, and Christian. How are longer names going to be handled? How are really short names going to be handled? What happens if somebody has a name that's 2 words long? Is it going to clip the second word and just make it the first word? This is reflective of a lot of, like, say, white names that are generally going to be shorter in a range of like 5 to 7 characters, and does not apply to necessarily everybody in this kind of workforce. These images, while very pretty and these gradients look really nice, do not tell me literally anything. I have no idea what these are for. I don't know if these are posts. I don't know if these are different categories. Having something that's more reflective of what the actual user would be putting here would be way more helpful. I literally could not tell you what these graphs mean at all. They look very nice. The colors are good. The distribution of this graph in particular just is very visually pleasing because it's nice composition, but I have no idea what it does, if this is a good example of what it would actually be used for, right? So there's all these kind of different things that are very complex, and I would say that are abstracted away here for the sake of it looking nice. One example that I think is good is that this menu has real captions for categories. These are probably what the actual tool would be used for. And so this is very helpful, but there's a lot of different things here that don't look like they're actually going to be useful. Like these numbers here, unclear if these are actually reflective of what the final product would be for. So how does content-driven design work? I've now ragged on these things for a couple of minutes. I've said that I don't like them. How do we make this better? Good content is essentially based on users and their motivations. And this is why it's so important that you have a good understanding of your users and the community that you're building with, so that you know what it's going to look like when they are using the product, when it's taken away from you. There's a lot of different tools that you can use in UX research that are going to help you inform content-driven design. So the entire process that we ask you to do of user research, of like, say with the midterm, looking into the restaurant, getting testimonies, hearing about other people's experiences, your own experience, that actually helps you inform the kind of content that you're putting in. So when you're starting a project, consider the questions like, what are you trying to communicate to your audience? What has the user seen before they get to your content? You know, what is the schema that they're going in with, and what assumptions are we allowed to make? What are they looking for, and how can your design efficiently help them find what they need? If your design abstracts this or makes it obscured or makes it difficult to find something that they need to find, it's not serving the user in the best way possible. So some of these UX research methods that we've touched about recently, or back in week 4, I believe, when we talked about user research and user testing, these are 3 more methods that you can think about that are going to help with this process, specifically of figuring out content. First is card sorting. So this is the idea of just taking a lot of words or images or ideas and then asking participants to sort them in a way that makes sense to them. So in cases I've done this with, like when I've done user testing for other people, they may have put a list of features and then a list of screens, and they wanted me to sort those features into screens where I think that they would inherently go. This helps you get a sense of users' intuition, what people are going to assume when they're looking at your product, so that you don't go in with only your own knowledge, you go in with a knowledge of your users as well. So in this case, you have the categories are not explicit here. I could personally pick like how to apply in its own category where admissions goes underneath that. But based on the way that participants trend and the patterns that you see across multiple people doing this kind of activity, you're going to figure out where the content might necessarily go. This is going to help you develop what's called an information architecture that helps people basically figure out this mental model or this mental map of what an app looks like. The second is journey mapping, which you might be familiar with from other kinds of like human-centered design courses. The idea here is to figure out what a person's experience is from beginning to end by figuring out their own kind of emotional state and things that they might think or say along that process. So this is somebody who's trying to switch their mobile plan. This is maybe the process of them going through maybe the couple of days or the couple of weeks that it takes to go through with this entire process where they figure out their current plan, they figure out if they can pay less, they watch other commercials, they compare it to other kinds of sources, they negotiate with their current carrier. You see that at this point, it's kind of lower because you can be more distressing, it can be more stressful to the person who's doing this. And therefore you're kind of at a lower emotional state. And the idea is that hopefully, fingers crossed, by the end, they're at a higher point than they were at the beginning. You've improved their life somehow, you've made this experience a little bit better for them. So this process of going through and making journey maps usually means interviewing users and basing this either on one particular power user, taking a bunch of people's different experiences and kind of averaging them out to make what you might think is one cohesive journey map for the quote unquote average user or for one persona, or maybe even just having multiple journey maps for multiple different kinds of personas. So say that I'm working on, like let's say the midterm project, I want to make a delivery app. There might be a variety of different users, say like a business that's trying to do catering, an elderly user who isn't familiar with using the entire product, but they really like this restaurant, a college student who's very familiar with the kind of platform. They might all have different journey maps, but they probably all have similar trends in their emotional state. A third idea is this information architecture that I've previously talked about. This is a little bit more technical. This is the process of like basically making the architecture or hierarchy of what the features are going to be in a particular product. So in this case, you can start with onboarding, the idea of the welcome page, the landing page. And then from the landing page, what options do I have? I can go to settings, I can go to my dashboard, I can go to my feed. In the feed, what can I look at? I can look at my friends, I can look at the people that I'm following, I can look at XYZ. Figuring all this out from the top to the bottom gives you a really, really clear mental model of what your product is going to look like, and how you want to guide your user along that product. So if I say that like I want somebody to figure out how to get to their teams, I know exactly what flow they have to go in. They have to go from here all the way across these and then all the way down here. I know what steps that they have to take in the intermediate. Any questions about content-driven design? Cool, we'll continue then. Plain language is another piece of language-based design that we're going to be talking about, but this is more in the realm of accessibility. And the idea is that accessible design also begins with accessible content. So plain language is communication that your audience can understand the first time that they read or hear it. It is language that makes sense to your users and to anybody who is listening. If you've ever seen those YouTube videos where they have like expert explains at the level of like XYZ, it's like explain it like I'm 5 or like tell me like I'm 5 is the kind of idea behind plain language, where this initiative grew out of government groups where the government essentially needs to serve everybody, right? The goal is that they are able to communicate to any of the citizens, anybody in that, I don't jurisdiction, I guess. So because these guidelines are made to be universally applicable, you can use them in spaces beyond just those government cases. So design accessibility extends beyond the things that we've talked about already, beyond just visual elements. Plain language is a really good example of where you can implement accessibility and prioritize it no matter where you are in the design process. The plain language checklist is formalized under these kind of government agencies that are linked in the readings this week, so you can take a better, closer look at them. But the main idea here is that you want to be as clear and concise as possible. You don't want to add flowery language. You don't want to add way too many words. You want to avoid things that can be complicated. This can be for a variety of demographics, right? Non-native speakers, it could be for elderly people, it could be for children, it could just be for anybody who has, let's say, like a reading disability, but also just anyone. It is easier for me to read, you must provide your mailing address and identification number than it is to say, like the applicant must provide his or her mailing address and his or her identification number, right? That's too many words to get to the point. So some main things that you can think about as you're writing in plain language are the way that you organize it, right? So useful headings, like in this particular example, you see this very clear grid system. Let's say, don't say is in this column, say is in this column. And then we have all these different examples that are laid out in a way that is easy for me to visually identify. It's organized, it serves the reader's needs. I know exactly what I'm trying to get out of this when I look at it. Another thing that I think can be like controversial, especially in academia, is the idea of speaking in third person versus second person. So a lot of academic papers, let's say scholarly articles, that is not plain language. That is almost never plain language. Scholarly articles are very hard to read because that's the way that academia has molded. And then maybe there are some more real reasons behind it, but a lot of this is also the idea of elitism and kind of like gatekeepiness of academic papers, right? If you were to write academic papers in a more clear tone of voice, they would be way more accessible to a larger group of people. So you don't want to go in the direction of that. You want to go in the direction of saying like you, using pronouns to speak to the reader, talk to them because they are the ones who are accessing the content. Another way to go about this is using short words and short sentences. This is something that we see in our slides as well. The idea is that we want to make sure that things are as concise as possible. Use concrete words, cut out extra things, and then also use tables and lists to simplify complex material like you see on the left here. So on the web, there's a couple of other things that you can think about, stuff that we've talked about in terms of good composition as well. So stuff like line length, stuff like visually these text boxes that you have. These are a lot more difficult to parse through because it's just a lot of text. If we change this to something that conveys the exact same information but delivers it in a lot better way, it's going to be a lot less stressful to the user. Therefore, they're going to be happier when they're using it, right? So things like saying click here as a link is not helpful. Saying things like, sorry, I just read that line. Using white space so that pages are easy to scan. You don't need to pack as much information into one space as you can. It can be really, really helpful to use white space in a way that's in a way that creates visual space and a visual rhythm that's easier to follow. Using the same words that your readers would use when they're doing a web search is another example, thinking about not even just in like a search engine optimization way, but how is somebody going to ask this question? What are they going to be looking up? Like when people think about Figma decal, they're probably not actually looking up the word decal unless they go to UC Berkeley. So to make this more visible, we talk about it as a course or a class, because decal is not a word that everybody knows. And then the final thing that we've kind of touched on as well is don't assume a certain amount of knowledge. There are some assumptions that you're able to make if you know your user group really, really well. But in general, you want to assume that they're coming in with either zero knowledge or just baseline knowledge. So you need to make sure that things are explained, that you don't share new concepts without explaining them or without having a way to figure out what they mean. So any questions about plain language or content-driven design? Awesome. These are things that we kind of gone through pretty quickly. We talk about them a little bit more in the readings, but I find these to be very, very important and also something that will give you a leg up, I think, on a lot of other designers in that these priorities are something that are not necessarily extremely difficult to implement, but will make the quality of your work go up. It'll be a lot easier to understand what you're creating. It'll be a lot easier to utilize whatever that you're making. So I would keep these in high priority as you're doing any kind of work on the line. Cool. So last thing we're going to talk about today, a little bit more fun, is just some Figma plugins. And we're going to just be sharing a list of plugins that we own personally like on course staff. And then I'll be showing you also how to find more plugins on community. So what exactly are plugins? They are like essentially little power-ups, things that can extend functionality. If you use any kind of Chrome extension, it's the same general idea. You're adding something on top of the tool to make it more usable, to make it more powerful, to add a feature that you've always wanted. Figma has a very large community of people who develop these plugins, people who develop these resources. So if you've ever worked on something and said, I wish that Figma had a feature that did XYZ, 90% chance somebody already thought of that and they've already built it and it exists somewhere for you. So plugins are built by other community members. You can also build your own plugins from scratch if you're interested. Coming. And these are some examples of things that we like. But first, I will show you how to find them. So if you go to your own area here in your own files, you can go to this button that has the globe icon and then go to community. And from community, you can search for anything that you're looking at, or you can say, I want to look at plugins specifically by going here. So right here, you're going to see these are currently what Figma finds to be the top things. Also, something that happened since the last lecture, Figma added paid plugins and paid resources. So now you have the option to filter by paid and free or just free. I'm going to look at just free things, but now there's ways to like basically support creators directly through Figma by buying their purchases or buying their products that they're making for free for users, no longer free, which is very helpful, but also I guess means that there are less things for students to use. But here I can look at some free plugins like examples here. And then when I click on one of these, like let's say I want to look at HTML design, what this plugin does is essentially convert any website into fully editable Figma designs. That's pretty cool. If I want to try this out, I can just click try it out. I'll add it to my own files. And then this is going to come, I think, with a file that the developer has created to kind of lead you through this entire plugin. So as I download this, hopefully this will load. Fun little Windows bug here is that this is very broken. So yeah, the plugins are going to be from this menu right up here. I have all this information. I can say run. I can do all of this information that I have right here. I'm not going to do this right now because I don't have a website that I want to convert into Figma, but this is the gist of how it's going to work. Then if you're in your own file and you want to try using one of your plugins, we can just do is go into the top bar, click plugins, and then use something that you have installed. So I'll show you how I use Able. This is a plugin that I use pretty frequently. It tells you color contrast very quickly. So what I can do is select two layers, and then see the contrast ratio. So in this case, I selected this entire frame, which has a white background, so it's reading it as white, and then this piece of text, which is reading as black. And it's telling me that the contrast ratio is 16.1 to 1. If I were to select this piece of text and then this pink, I can see that the contrast ratios are high enough. So again, that's just through here, through the plugins. So really quickly, some of the plugins that we like on staff are organized by utility, accessibility, content, and then just like fun ones. Utility ones. One of the ones that I would highly recommend you install immediately is Better Font Picker, because the font picker in Figma is terrible. The Better Font Picker is just a plugin that shows you previews of all of the different fonts, so that's a little bit easier to figure out what it is that you want to use. Rename it lets you do batch naming. Clean document lets you organize things. Find and replace actually exists now as a feature. So these are a little bit of an older set of recommendations, but I will say that some of these things have since become fully fledged Figma features, which is a fun tongue twister. Find and replace, for example, was added very recently, where if you do Command F, there is actually find. So if I say like the word language, I can find all of those things really, really quickly. This didn't exist when we first made the slide deck, so this is very nice to have. Simulator does like a select all with based on a range of properties. That actually also exists in Figma, where if I go to the quick command by pressing Command / I can do select all with same font. And it's going to pick everything in my document the same font. Anyway, getting ahead of myself, adding all my little tangents. But plugins are going to be your friend in figuring out extra features that you want that you can't find in Figma itself. Some accessibility plugins that I would highly recommend. Able is the one that I just used. Focus Order is also more interesting in that it annotates and tests designs for keyboard users. So if you're not using a mouse or if you're not able to use like a touch screen, keyboard navigation is going to be really helpful, and Focus Order helps you figure out the order of items that would happen if you're like tabbing through a page. Colorblind is going to let you view your designs if you are not colorblind through different kinds of color deficiencies by modifying the colors to be what they might look like to somebody who is colorblind. And viewports is going to show you what your designs look like on a bunch of different sizes to enforce responsiveness. So we talked about auto layout today. Viewports is going to automatically show you, hey, this is going to look like it's on a MacBook. This is what it's look like on a PC. Make sure that you make this responsive. Make sure that you're thinking about these different things. Content plugins. These are going to be relevant for this week's homework, actually. So this is something that Annie, when she created this homework assignment, she personally used the Google Sync and filled in all of the content on this homework, which is going to be a menu, by just putting all the information in Google Sheets. That means that she didn't have to go into every single text box in Figma and retype all of the names of these different dishes, retype all of these prices. She could just connect it to a Google Doc and it would sync over for her with this plugin. Another couple of these things, these are going to be helpful in figuring out more real content as opposed to lorem ipsum. Content reel, Mapsicle, Chart, Blush, and Unsplash are all going to be for text, maps, charts, illustrations, photos, ways that you can implement real content in your work as you're going through the process without it being too much additional burden on you. More fun things, timer lets you add any kind of text into a countdown timer like you can do in FigJam. Blobs help you make these blob shapes, which are very popular in flat design these days. Figmotion helps you make animations. There's something called flyover that's really helpful if you're doing any kind of presentation. And then also, this is just like a shout out. One of our friends who now works at Figma made Tetris inside of Figma as a plugin, so you can play entire video games in Figma now if you really wanted to. And if you get mad, if you play Figma Tetris in class, I can't get mad at you because I told you to. So last thing is just, again, how to find and install plugins. This is Angelina looking up Better Font Picker. You can go to this plugins tab on the side when you search something up. So I'm going to go back to community right here, go back. And then I'm going to say I want, oh my gosh, something like photos. I want something that's going to help me find photos. And I can go to plugins to find all of the plugins that are related to photos. And there are 70 of them. There's plenty that I can look through. This icon is going to tell you if it's usable in Figma Design, Figma and FigJam, or FigJam only. So let's see if there's any that are FigJam only. There are not any that are exclusive. But the gist here is that it's usable in both Figma and FigJam. You can run them by right-clicking or by going through the plugin section here. But if I just right-click, and somewhere visible, I can go to plugins and then I can access the last couple of plugins that I've tried. That's all. FigJam also has something called widgets, which I will just show you very, very quickly. Widgets are a lot like plugins, but they're more like features that you can add as like fun things. So if I go down to this section that says more and I go to widgets, there's a lot of like very fun ones here. So this or that is like an icebreaker thing that you can add into a file. So if I said like, do you like coffee or tea? If I put this in a file and let everybody vote, everybody would be able to see this, click on it, and would react based on how people click on them. So widgets are like plugins, but they're generally used for more fun things or more practical things. They have kind of a visual UI component to them, as opposed to just plugins that are kind of like additional features or additional functionality. Cool. that is all for today. So we're going to be wrapping up pretty early. I'll be here to answer any questions if you need for in a couple more minutes. But I want to talk about this week's homework and lab. I know that the midterm is this week, so I totally understand if you need a bit of time to rest. Please take your time to rest because I know this is also midterm season. If you ever need an extension on anything, please just ask me or your TA. We are very flexible about granting extensions. We never want this to be your number one stressor because it's literally a decal. And we want you to get out of it what you personally want to get out of it. So that being said, this week's homework is something that we want you to spend a little bit of time on. So if you need more time on it, that's totally fine. You're going to be practicing auto layout by making your own menu based on a menu that you like, or just coming up with one on your own. Please don't hesitate to come to office hours next week. This is pretty tricky, or just to ask your TA if you need any help. And the lab this week is called Flexbox Froggy or Auto Layout Froggy. This is, I think, one of the most fun labs and the most thorough labs that we have. That's going to be a really helpful document that you can look back on as like a reference material. It's going to just lead you through these kind of mini games that show you how to use auto layout more effectively. So please do try to make it to lab this week. And if you can't, please do come to office hours to make it out. That is all for today. The secret word for today will be monument for the Monument Valley game that we talked about earlier. So that's monument, MONUMENT. Make sure to put that in the attendance form for today, which will be in Slack if you need it. And that is going to be all. So just a couple of really quick reminders. I'm just going to hover over this so you can see the word monument. Homework and readings and lab are this week, as per usual. In a couple of weeks after spring break, we'll be introducing the final project, which is going to be very open-ended. So think about that. Start practicing with auto layout if it's something that's interesting to you. Ask if you need any questions or any help. I will respond to everything in Slack eventually very quickly. And don't forget about the midterm tonight. Has anyone here already submitted? Yay, good job. If you haven't submitted yet, that's totally fine. Take your time. Let us know if you need any help. And that's all for me today. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah. Monument, MONUMENT, monument.